Thank you for joining us today, everybody. My name is Tim Hartman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Government Executive Media Group. It's our pleasure to host you in our building, in our new facility here for conference space. So this is our first time trying it out with our client base, so thank you for joining us. So today it is our fifth Leading Brands release party. It's our release event. Thank you guys for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about Leading Brands and what we're doing here at the company with it. Who is this your first time at a Leading Brands event? If you just raise your hand so I can just, okay, great. We got a lot of new people. How many people are never looked at a Leading Brands study at all? Okay, great. So Leading Brands is a study that we built, started about 5 years ago, but really it went on before that, where we have a research division at Government Executive Media Group, and we were getting all kinds of questions and research, like we were being commissioned for research on brand perception. So companies that were rebranding, companies that had a perception issue, companies that were trying to change things, and they would use our database and our research capability to engage people and get feedback on it. And a lot of times it was because they had commercial research that was going on, they're a global company, and they were having trouble getting a valid government sample, or the government was just different. And so we started doing just ad hoc research and analysis. And I remember at the time thinking, like, it'll be really interesting how these meetings go when we get together with their global research people. And lo and behold, we were kind of holding our own in the room. The research was compatible with these other things that were going on. And so we started doing it on a more proactive basis, and I think we had the epiphany that it would be really interesting to see different market segments. And then it was like, well, let's just do all of the contractors, and can we get a big enough sample to do all of the top contractors? And when we figured, size the market and took all the companies into account, we realized we could do over 50 companies and get a real benchmark and a real market map. And so we started Leading Brands 5 years ago, and since then, many people use it as an annual planning tool. We have about 20 to 30 companies that are just annual participants in cutting the data and looking at it lots of different ways, and we're just really proud of what it's become. So before we get started with Leading Brands, I did want to just point out a few things for you. First is, you have a couple things on your chairs. This year we're doing a really exciting event, and I just wanted to plug it for you for a minute. It's called the Government Hall of Fame. We're launching it this September. It's actually been in the works for a couple of years. We believe that there's, in this environment, there is a greater need to honor the public servants who are really just doing the work of the country. And as we thought about what we could do to honor them, we started thinking about an annual gala, but then we realized there's really no lifetime achievement award that spans all of government. You might get into different niches that have lifetime achievement awards, but there was no actual Hall of Fame like you have in different industries. And so in September, we're holding our launch gala for the Hall of Fame, where we're going to be inducting lots of people from history, and then 5 or 6 people who are living and will be inducted in person. I have members of Congress there, cabinet secretaries. It's at the National Cathedral. It's one of the first gala events that they're hosting at the National Cathedral. They're excited to partner with us on it. And this is on your chair just because I want it to be on your calendars. I want you to engage with your companies on it. And also, we're starting table sales. So if you'd like to host a table, you can contact your rep at Government Executive and get one. The other thing is, this is from our partners at National Journal. It's our sister division in the company. They are doing some really interesting things with influence mapping. And so what they have is a product called NSI, which is really mapping influence around particularly policy issues. And they're starting to do it around government contracts. And we've partnered with them on a few of these, where you can really take a large acquisition and map out the people who matter, but also the people who matter to those people. They hired a bunch of people that have counterterrorism backgrounds and did this in tracking down terrorists in the Middle East, and now they use that same methodology for lots of different applications in Washington, D.C. It's a fascinating product, and we're holding an event with them in July 10th. So if you're interested in that, it's kind of on the cutting edge of government affairs. We're trying to see how it works in the government contracting space, so we'd love your feedback. If you're available on July 10th, we'd love to host you or your executives at the dinner to meet with the team. So that's basically it for commercial messages. Let me get back to my script. So this year was really kind of an unbelievable year. in the government market. There have been a number of mergers and acquisitions. There have been, we have L3 and Harris merging. We had a number of complete acquisitions. CA Technologies was acquired this year, which was one of the leading brands perennially. And then we also had brands that renamed, like PwC's government division rebranded to Guidehouse earlier this year, or last year. And so there's a lot of flux in the perception and the market map that we see. So we'll share some of the highlights of that soon. In terms of our program today, we have Connie Sayers and Igor Gain, who is the analyst that runs Leading Brands for us. They're going to share some of the top-level trends we're seeing in the data, which is really some fascinating stuff. And then I am going to host a panel discussion with people who are the power players in government marketing and communications and research, which I'll introduce in a moment. And then it'll be followed by the companies, the list that is of the people who are moving the fastest in the study, so not necessarily the top brands, but the people who are rising the fastest in the study, and then we'll release the full list of about 25 or 30 leading brands this year. So I want to talk a little bit about the study. I talked to you a little bit about the history of leading brands, but what Leading Brands really is the largest sample of contractor brand feedback available. And we use our database and we supplement it with some other data. And we eventually get about 3,500 respondents, and it represents all of government, so civilian, defense, state and local. We measure 85 companies and their brands. It's very, I think it's a very close relationship with the brands that they're rating. So we do filter out people who aren't really familiar with your brand to give feedback. So it's not just people saying, hey, I hate that company. Amazon didn't give me my package last week, so blah, 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 blah. It's actually companies that are familiar with your government work or are familiar with your government brand who are rated as part of your rating as a company. And so we get all of this data back. We get their favorability, their familiarity. We can map it by gender, by location, by geography, by grade rank. So you can get some really interesting crosstabs as you look through where your strengths and weaknesses are as a brand. But I think the coolest thing that it does is it allowed us to create this quadrant of brands in government. And this is literally the way the quadrant plays out. And so what we do is we can map how well your company is known versus how well your company is perceived. And you get these interesting distribution. Every one of these dots is a different company. And so if you are a company that is very well known, but you're poorly perceived, we call it notorious. These are a little aggressive, but a notorious companies here. If you're on this side of the line and you're perceived very well and very well known, you're a renowned brand. So this is where you'll see a lot of the leading brands that we identify are probably the brands that are up in this quadrant. The hidden gems are the companies that just have like raving fans, but aren't well known. So the people who rated them are rating them sort of off the charts. Like this company here, if they could move their perception or their awareness up, they would be a renowned brand. And then down here is where, and you can see it clusters, there's a lot of companies down in this space that really don't even rank well on awareness. So if you're not aware and the company's not kind of middling in your performance or the perception, you're kind of an unknown brand and you have a lot of work to do because you got to go both up and to the right, which is probably the biggest challenge we see when companies are trying to plan around this. The cool thing about this is all companies, but you can filter it by your competitive set. We can filter it by civilians. We can filter it by senior buyers. We can filter it by state and local. And when you do that, there's a lot of differences that come out in it. So if you filter your competitive set by gender and grade rank, you're going to see the dots move around a lot. And so that's where I think companies get a lot of the value out of it, is this trying to understand where your true strengths and weaknesses are. You could do it by different agencies as well. So I think that's the benefit of the study, is that if you engage with us on it, we really can customize it to whatever your BD priorities are for the next year. So if you're going into the VA as a big priority next year and you guys have never really done business in the VA, we can give you a snapshot into how you rank against the key competitors in the VA. So it's meant to be consultative. So that's the overview of leading brands, we're going to give you a few of the key insights that we found in the study this year. We've been working literally every day for the last 3 weeks on trying to derive what the study this year is telling us. And there's just a lot of data, but I'm going to have Connie Sayers, our president, introduce some of the data, and we have Igor Gain, who is the leader of leading brands this year, who can basically give you all of the details on what he's seeing in the data, come and present some insights for you. So please join me in welcoming them. Chairs.
Perfect, thank you.
No chairs.
We're good. Yeah, we're good. Nope, we're good. I'm gonna use the room. Oh wow. Okay, yeah. Perfect. So. First thing we're going to look at is taking the information that Tim had told you and break it down a little bit more. So Igor, let's talk a little bit about who these folks were.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I think first and foremost, we want to make sure that you all know who we actually surveyed and who we're talking about when we speak to the survey. As you can see here, it really is not just Washington insiders. We have coverage around the country. So 87% of the respondents are actually outside of the DMV area. Nearly half of the respondents are women, which is indicating some major trends that we're seeing in the buyer market as well. 28% of the respondents are in state or local government, so we're seeing not just the federal, not just the defense segments, but we're really seeing a lot of coverage of the survey in state and local as well. And what you all are probably wondering about more than anything is nearly 3/4 of the respondents are actually purchase decision makers. So they have some role in the purchase decision-making process in their organization.
Yeah, and a couple things too. We are filming this, so if you go back and you want your colleagues to have some of this information, there will be a film copy of this, so that's great if you like it. And then also, don't feel like you have to just, we love it if you take notes, but we will also be sending a copy of this out to you as a registrant today. So definitely feel free if you think you've missed something or you can't necessarily see something, we'll get this to you. So the 85 companies that were studied.
Yep, so this is the list, voila. There's the leading brands list at the very end, but this is who made it into the study to begin with. The primary criteria were threefold. These are the metrics that we really used to make sure that companies were qualified into the study to begin with. The first and foremost was scale of business with the government. So we used lists of the top contractors in the federal, defense, and state and local space to create our first criterion. After that, we were looking at any new companies that entered the market. So if there were any big movers, we made sure that they were incorporated as well, even though they may not have been in past studies. And then last but not least, we wanted to make sure that these companies were actually familiar enough to generate enough responses to give you all that meaningful data and all the cuts that Tim talked about. So the last filter is just familiarity threshold.
And I think the question that we get a fair amount is, my company wasn't studied, so this doesn't have much meaning for me. Actually, we can, even if you are not one of the, first, you get a lot of information by looking at the competitive set around different categories that perhaps your company is interested in. And you can get a lot of really great data, and we can actually customize a study for you if you are interested in finding out how you kind of play within this, within the information that the quadrants and stuff that Tim was talking about. One of the things, say for example, you have a really great contract at one agency, you're doing really well, but you're not necessarily well known at some of the other agencies, but you want to be, so there's some white space that you're trying to cover there. This is a great way to this study can be very helpful to kind of see what's the competitive landscape, who's good at what, and where's that area that you can actually make a difference. So there's a lot of great valuable data, so just because your company may not be on here, does not mean that we can't help you and kind of locate you within this data and this information. So.
All right, so, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Jumping into the meat a little bit, what we have here is actually a breakdown of media preferences for both the federal government, that's including defense agencies, and for state and local government. You'll see that there are some similarities. There's some clustering at the top. For federal respondents, we have online news articles, email newsletters, research, digital events, and print publications as the top 5 sources of media. And so that's the first finding. For state and local, there's some overlap for sure. Online news articles, email newsletters, in-person events, research, and print publications are the top 5, so some similarities and some differences. But I think the main takeaway here is really that state and local is just consuming media on a different level than federal and defense. So that rank order is important. So the top media sources are pivotal, but just seeing how much greater that share is for state and local is something to note as well. I did also want to touch on the fact that podcasts have remained strong, even though there was not a big jump between 2018 and 2019. They have remained after coming in at about 15% of government overall. So really just some variation between segments, but overall this is the breakdown as we saw it this year.
And if you can't see, the gray is state and local. And Aaron Heffron and I were just talking about, if you went to the wonderful content marketing review that Market Connections did about a month ago, I thought it was fabulous. Interestingly, it breaks almost the same way. I think you all had product demonstrations as a category, which scored very, very high, but the data breaks in a really, this is what people consume. The other interesting thing about both these findings and how they match with what Market Connections has found is that, I mean, state and local, I don't know how they have hours in the day to consume all the media that they do, but they do. And that's both good and bad. So if you're trying to go into that market, just understand they're voracious consumers, but you're also competing, they're also voracious consumers. So you've got a lot to compete with. But it's interesting, I think they're also willing to try out some new things. So you see they're actually consuming podcasts more than anyone else. So it's a great they're going to be willing to go with you on some other, different things to new media challenges. So that's a good opportunity. All right, so we will go then to attributes that buyers care about. And trust, it's all about trust, right?
Sure, so
Sure.
well, speaking as a survey, or speaking as the typical respondent in the survey, absolutely. So what we're seeing is largely a carryover from 2018 to 2019 in terms of the rank order. Trust still remains the #1 attribute. I will also add that these 8 attributes are very highly correlated with favorability. What that means in layman's terms is that as you go up in trustworthiness and customer service and customized solutions, for example, you're more likely to see a growth in your favorability as well. So a growth in how positively your brand is viewed. One thing, or a couple things that I will note between 2018 and 2019 is that trustworthiness actually separated from the pack a little bit, so it becomes even more important in 2019 than it was in 2018. And then we saw expertise actually jump into the top 3 and value drop out a little bit. That isn't to say that value is no longer important. They are all very important collectively. And in fact, we measure them all together when we're looking at relationships with brand perception. But expertise is now a top 3 attribute in the study.
Yeah. It could be that maybe we're seeing a little bit of the demise of LPTA. It could be some definitely things, some changes there. But I think the big significant thing is the pull away of trustworthiness. If you see customer service from 97 to 92, it's the next. It was always the second most important attribute, but it's definitely trustworthiness is definitely pulling ahead. So very good. And so what do they care about?
So what we're looking at here are some of the statistically significant differences in attributes based on the actual demographics of the respondents. When I say statistically significant, we're actually testing at a 95% confidence interval, which is pretty much an academic standard. So that's the significance level that we use here for leading brands. But to jump into the actual findings, we're seeing that respondents aged 55 and older are more likely to prioritize experience and expertise. Rising managers, so that's people that are first kind of getting their start in government, that are earlier on in their careers, are more likely to prioritize employee care. And then last but not least is the power buyers category. So those are people with over $1 million in purchase authority at their organization. They see expertise and value as just more important, more prioritized than other respondents.
I think one thing that's always interesting about the employee care category is that if you're a professional services company and you have your employees embedded in agencies and your company is not perceived well by those employees, the government is going to hear that. And so there's going to be this they're not treated, as an employee, I'm not treated very well. So that is something I think that, for rising managers, employee care matters, and your own employees are really great ambassadors. So if that information that they're talking about your company is not great, that's going to be something that the government themselves is going to see. Another interesting thing about this is just keep it, think through your key targets. I think this is a good strategy. What are the, depending upon who you want to be reaching, different attributes may matter, and so your marketing focus may have to change. And so we have additional demographic cuts for grade, rank, purchase authority, employer, gender, age, region, agency, so we can really drill down on what your marketing initiatives are to what audience. And I think that's just something that's very important, especially if you have a limited budget, So And then key takeaways. This is really interesting. Everyone wants to have the big consumer brand. So it has pluses and minuses, right?
It does. It absolutely does. So what we saw actually was, I think, a pretty compelling finding between 2018 and 2019, and that's when you separate out brands based on those that had that large, robust consumer portion of their business. That's here on the right side. And sorry if I speak to the left side of the room a little bit much. On the other side is we have the brands that are a bit more focused on the government and don't have as robust of a consumer portion. Year over year between 2018 and 2019, we actually saw a 4% increase in how well known the brands with that consumer portion were, whereas between 2018 and 2019, we actually saw a small dip. So 20% to 19%, maybe not catastrophic, but compared against a 4% increase, a pretty stark difference, a 5% gap, if you will. So definitely something to keep in mind.
I mean, the overall message here, I think, is it's hard to build awareness, and brands, certainly with a consumer focus, are going to have a larger communication landscape to play with. So they're sponsoring Redskins stadiums and things. I mean, they just have a lot more communication things at their command. But while people want to have a big consumer brand, it won't help you with favorability. That's the one thing I think you found. In some cases, and we're going to show you this to you in a few slides ahead here, it can have a negative correlation. So it's both a plus and a minus, especially if your consumer side is actually not having some brand damage. So you want to look, I think, more carefully as a strategy here. Take a look at, so you're like, okay, look, I have a limited budget. I don't have a giant brand. I'm not Apple. I'm not, what do I do? The thing is, take a look at the competitive set for the category that matters to you. You'll find much more information there and much more kind of running room for your brand and what you need to be doing and who are the key players in that particular category. That's going to matter to you most, and that's where you can make the most gains. So, yeah. All right, and then this is very interesting. We always find this. Every year there's always some findings with gender. So what did we see here?
Sure. So treading softly here, really what we're looking at are just the top 10 lists of the most favorite brands by gender. And you'll see that towards the top, there are certainly some similarities and some overlap. But once you get into that 6 to 10, so still top 10, but just in the second half of that list is where the differences come in. And so what we're seeing is that driven by some differences in media habits, driven by some broader differences in perception by gender still continues to be a key demographic in driving brand awareness and brand perception. So I can let the lists sort of speak for themselves, but I think Connie will.
Yeah, good brands are good brands. Okay, but when you start to see some interesting stuff happen here and here, I feel like I'm doing like the CNN political map,
John King.
Here and here, 62% of the precincts in, but you've got some really interesting things. So I think what we've also seen is that women are more bearish on favorability, especially when it comes to professional services categories, defense and technology companies, particularly defense and legacy technology brands. Some of these brands have weaknesses with women, and I think you can definitely see that. And women surveyed for the study were also more likely to rate innovation, employee care, and product customization highly. So there are definitely just some gender differences. Women are a very important buying category, so there have definitely been some brands who don't have good perceptions with women. That's something that I think you need to take a look at, especially, they're a very important buying category, buying group, so it's definitely something to keep in mind. And again, these are just things to always keep in mind. It's just different filters in which we're looking at the data. And then market segment, where are they coming from? Are they in the federal civilian, DoD, and state and local?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to gender, we're seeing that market segment. So federal, civilian, defense, and state and local actually informs some of these priority lists as well. And again, a bit more similarity here, just looking at the top 5, but you'll also see some key differences as well where, for example, Dell EMC is a top 5 brand for state and local, but it actually doesn't make the list for civilian and DoD. Some other differences that I will kind of let you all parse through, and Connie will add some context to, but I think at the bottom line, really what we're saying is that there are notable differences. So brand perception does vary across employer and market segment.
And you just can't have a one-size-fits-all marketing strategy. I think that's the big thing because, Cisco's a great example. I mean, there's a lot of money in state and local categories. So, taking a look at how your brand is perceived and having a different strategy for each one of these segments, I think is really an important thing, especially if you're responsible for the entire public sector portfolio, which increasingly many of you are. So, great. This is a really fascinating slide. I'm thrilled we get to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at here are essentially the impacts of name changes and broader brand changes year over year. So I'm going to speak to the familiarity piece a little bit. It may not surprise anybody to know that a name change impacts familiarity, but I think what is actually pretty surprising is the degree to which that happens and actually the ways in which that breaks out in the government sector. So what you're seeing on the left side here is the familiarity in 2019 of brands that remain continuous year over year. So brands that in 2018 had the same name in 2019. So that's 21%, approximately 1/5 of the respondents knew these brands. That drops all the way down to 7% for brands that had some kind of M&A associated name change or just any other kind of name change year over year. So again, I'll let the numbers speak for themselves, but you really see a large decline, and that's just one factor to consider as efforts are being built out.
So in addition to a rebranding or a name change, another impact to the brand is controversy. I think both of these three brands here are good case studies in a couple different interesting ways. First, Boeing, during the time we were studying this, they were having the 737 MAX issues. They were kind of knee-deep in that. And so this is an example of a consumer brand actually having a negative impact to the public sector brand. And I think you saw, what a considerable dip in favorability for Boeing.
Absolutely.
Palantir, from 2017 to 2018, dipped very low and then came back from 2018 to 2019. This is they have had a lot. Their brand has been a little political. I just saw in the news this week that they were uninvited from Berkeley because of their data being used for some of the immigration things that happened. And so the impact. You're seeing brand volatility here because it's just a little bit more of a political brand. So if you're in the news, and not necessarily in a good or bad way, you're going to see this have an impact. But they've actually made some gains this year.
They have, and so yeah, in large part driven by some of those attributes that we presented to you all earlier, they made some key gains. They actually saw a decline in trustworthiness, for example, so it goes to show that it isn't just about one attribute or two attributes, it's that kind of the rating across the board. And so by scoring well in customized solutions, in customer service, and in expertise, Palantir was actually able to raise their perception, just showing kind of the interesting dynamics that play out within the attributes.
And then finally, SpaceX was a very highly rated brand in past studies. And I think what you found, Igor, here is that after a few failed launches, there was a significant dip in favorability for this company.
So they're more of the Boeing example where you see kind of a direct relationship.
So, and then this is, I think, one of the most interesting areas that you as a marketer can really influence. We're seeing a lot of interest around the idea of topic association. So we picked 3 topics: artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital transformation. These are the same 3 that we did last year, so we actually have some year-over-year data here.
We do, and so again, same topics: AI, cybersecurity, and digital transformation, terms that you all probably hear on a day-to-day basis. So no surprise why we picked those. But what is new this year is actually how these played out. So both the companies that made it into the top 5 and then the precise order of them. One thing I'll note in AI, again, some of these names may not strike you as too surprising, but IBM was 5th last year. They are actually 1st this year. They are the brand that's most associated with the concept of AI. We see a large amount of carryover with cybersecurity and digital transformation, but really at the end of the day, I think the point to take away here is that concept association is very variable and there's a lot of play. And so if there is an opportunity to sort of jump in and see some major headway where some of the attributes may be a bit more difficult to move the needle or familiarity, the concept association is kind of a dynamic field.
And we had quite a few people move off here. One of the key omissions this year I would like to point out, because I think it speaks to an earlier slide, CA was one of the leaders in this category last year. And interesting thing, they were acquired by Broadcom. Again, and Broadcom was not able. Again, it comes back to kind of like merging, rebranding, changing of the name. You're not seeing Broadcom here because it's hard to build quick awareness. But this is, if you have a limited budget, if you've got, this is a great way to really push your marketing strategy around the idea of topic ownership. We're seeing a lot of this. It's highly successful, and I think you can really make a difference here.
Absolutely.
We can see from the year-over-year data. So Perfect. Let's move to the next one. That's it. That's it. Great. So so what we're going to do next is we are going to, I'll move over here a little bit. Tim is going to lead a panel on, I'm going to do some changing up here, on the power players, and we're going to be talking with Luann Brossman, who is the founder and president of Government Marketing University, Mark Amtower, founder and managing partner of Amtower and Company, and Aaron Heffron, president of Market Connections. With that, I will turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Connie. So I think it's fascinating when we look at those different cuts, and those are really born out of the five. We've presented different cuts every year of that presentation, but this year was a lot easier because just in presenting the different companies, I sit in on a lot of them. Those are the defining things that come out in the discussion. So why is company X ahead of us versus company Y? When you look at gender, key topic association, key thing, that's where it usually you have a problem somewhere in one of those things. I think the other place that we didn't get into deeply but is worth looking at is inside, outside DC. Vast differences sometimes in terms of who knows you in DC versus who knows you out in the field. So thank you for joining me today, everybody, for the panel. Connie introduced everybody, but I want to thank them for participating. I think we're going to talk a little bit about how research informs marketing, how you can be purposeful about marketing. And so I guess we'll just go down the line. We have Luann Brossman here, who I don't know if many of you know Luann, but you should. The Government Marketing University is one of the coolest innovations in our market. I think we learn a lot from it. You should check it out as well. Aaron helps her out with that as well. It's a great organization, so we're happy to have you guys here.
And Mark's a professor.
Mark is a professor too there, yeah. So
he was the original one.
Oh, really? I didn't know. So we got the full faculty panel here. Yeah, this is amazing. So Luann, what were some of the takeaways that you as you observed this, what were some of the findings that were stuck out to you?
Trustworthiness and customer service, and those are the top two. Trustworthiness, I'm still trying to noodle on how to do that as a marketer. It'd be an interesting discussion and roundtable to have, but it fits in really well with the customer journey, which is very much moving into the government marketing space. It's been on the commercial side for a while. And I think the way to get trustworthiness is to make sure your existing customers are happy. And marketers need to pay attention to existing customers, not just the prospect. I think a lot of times what we do is we don't pay attention to our customer list, and we don't market to them, and we should. And I think that will drive trustworthiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trust is one of the hardest. I mean, just think about your own personal trust. It's not easy for a company to build your trust, right? It takes experience. So, Aaron, what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I think the idea of the different attributes really don't change a lot from year to year. Mm-hmm. We see that as well. The government market doesn't change drastically from year to year. It's not as fickle as a consumer market is necessarily, and you have people that have been there a long time. We're dealing with a market where folks have been in the same seat doing the same thing for 10, 15, 20 plus years. They have long history and long memories. Mm-hmm. So seeing that some of those things don't change over time is not surprising. Additionally, the state and local market was one of the things. I mean, we saw it in our studies that we've done of the state and local market. As Connie mentioned, they're voracious in their desire for information. I don't know whether they feel like they've been left out, or if they're off, as we've seen, they're often a shop of one or two. So they need to be reading and seeing everything because there's nobody else to do it. Right. So they're the only source of that kind of information and feeding it into their organizations.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you who don't know, we have a state and local brand called Route 50, and we've seen this as well. And it's hard as a media company to serve it. It's hard as a marketer to serve it. Yeah. It's diffuse, but the benefit of serving it is that, well, one, they're doing important work, but I guess the advantage of serving it is that it's fragmented, and it's not as easy for them to go to an AFCEA breakfast in
right. They don't have the benefit of some of those umbrella organizations and working groups and things that many of the federal folks
I think it's also fragmented because 1 year a company will have public sector, meaning state and local and SLED. Then the next year they'll push out state and local again to the GEO. And then they'll come back. Or those companies, I think, that have it under one umbrella, so you've got a public sector marketing manager, state and local is seeing more love.
Yeah.
Because when they're a GEO, they're kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, we see that a lot. So, Mark, what were some of the things that stood out to you?
The trust factor is built on a number of things. The consistency, as Aaron pointed out. It's also built on producing information that's valuable to the customers that you serve. So we get back into that content part of this. And at the Market Connections event last month, Patricia Davis Moffett of Amazon said something that really resonated with me. And that was that content drives every aspect of marketing for Amazon Web Services. And if you think about that, it's so obvious. It was like a brick hitting me in the face. So your consistency here, putting out information that's valuable to the customers you serve, is the basis for that trust. They come to rely on you for useful information. If you start turning that information into an overt selling tool, you will destroy that trust.
Yeah, I think when I think about trust, one of the things that keeps standing out to me too is, and for all the marketers and communicators in the room, it's worth taking this lens on your role. I think that like you can only do so much with the experience of your company, right? Your company does what it does. You have people interacting with the government. You have the government interacting with your products. And as a marketer, you can only amplify the things that are good about what the essence of your company is. And so a lot of times when people go through this, I think we've had a couple of where it's like we're in deep sessions where the company's trying to figure out what went wrong in the last year. It's not because marketing didn't market well typically. It's usually because something happened with the company dynamic in the government that impacted. So your brand and the trust is, like Connie said, it's more than just like what your communication strategy was. It's kind of what the essence of your company was. So anyway, there's a lot of anecdotes that we've gotten from companies around just, intranet. Like if you run the intranet for an agency and the intranet doesn't work well and you thought it was a great idea to put your logo on the intranet to show everybody that you serve that agency, your brand is probably going to take a hit when that intranet is unreliable. And so it's little things like that can have an outsized impact as well.
And we see this, in the research we do. We have a lot of companies that come to us to ask about brand as well. And, understanding the brand is really important. I mean, that's you getting out there. You all are the ones that are putting that out there. But there's also the delivery on your brand promise. Right. I mean, you're making the promise of your brand, and that's when we talk about the reputation that you have as a company. The brand is what people know of you, and reputation is often their experience with you. And that can be your customers, that can be your own employees, that can be shareholders and investors. I mean, all of those interplay because you as marketers really have to serve all of those people along the way, because your employees, one, they're your ambassadors in the local agency often, but also you have to recruit new employees. I mean, you win a new contract, you're marketing out there to try to recruit new people. If they don't think you as a company are delivering on what you're doing, they don't want to associate themselves with you.
Right.
So it's just as important.
Yeah, this is a very insular market, so doing research on who the buttheads are is not that difficult. So, I mean, a reputation grows and it sticks. And it's not that hard. You go on LinkedIn, you find 3 or 4 former employees, you get in touch with them, and they go, I don't want to talk about that. God, that's terrible. Or something more colorful. So it's an easy place to reference pretty much anybody or any company.
I think as well, the whole focus around brand over time. So you can't make your brand visible quickly, but you can stay with a strategy and keep marching with that same message. We see all the time one-hit wonders. I'm going to do a webinar, but what are you going to do before? What are you going to do after? Oh, just going to do a webinar. So we teach at GMARQ, you got to wrap it, and then you've got to continue with that message, and you need to nurture that message. And even small companies, brand over time, stay consistent, rolling thunder marketing, and you'll get there.
So let's talk a little bit about, you each have a different angle on how you look at different marketing best practices. And Talk a little bit about how should good marketers be using research to plan and to improve? I mean, what are some of the things that you guys advise? Luann, do you want to?
Sure. Research is critical because a marketing plan needs a strategy, and you can't build a strategy until you know where you want to be. And you need to identify that. You need to identify up front where you're going, if it's a specific agency or if it's civilian or if it's topical, which I liked Connie said topic versus thought leadership, and I like that, kind of a change from thought leadership. But if you're cybersecurity, then you need to see where the dollars are, and research can help with that. You need to see where some of the brands are, and then you'll know where to go and where not to go and where your competition is. So you cannot begin to start a marketing plan strategically without knowing that research. It's a must.
Aaron, you run a research company.
Yeah,
what do you see?
Obviously,
Full disclosure.
I think it's very important. But just echoing some of what Luann said, is that they come to us when you have a problem, and it's, hey, we're not meeting our goals, or hey, we got some bad press, or hey, we don't seem to be connecting. We're trying to go into some new agencies and new realm, and we're not quite sure if we're going to play in there, or we're just acquiring another company right now, and we don't know whether to let that company's name continue because they have an incredible amount of strength and equity in these markets, or whether it's better to fold them underneath a master brand or do something in the middle. And those are the things is identifying the market of who you're going after, identify the key things that are going to trigger those folks. What plays in the VA is not necessarily the same thing that plays in the in the Army or in other places. So, really narrowing those things down and helping answer the questions. And I'm not talking, you have to do big studies and research and such. There's little things that you can do using information that's already out there to know, okay, strategically, here's where I need to go. Knowing where the top budget markets of state governments are. I mean, that information is available. Doing that kind of due diligence out there, looking at the federal contracts database and going and saying, okay, here's where the major contracts are, and here's the last 5 companies that won it. What do I know about those companies? And kind of going through that stages. We'd love it if you came and said, hey, we want you to dive in and figure out what really is going to get us in there. But there's a lot of information available out there to do that due diligence ahead of time.
Mark?
I have a thought. So
Imagine that.
Imagine that. So there's 2 major approaches to marketing, 2 schools of thought. There's experiential marketing, which is my habitual home, and there's the data-driven marketing. But I'm thrilled to have a government executive, Market Connections, and to a slightly different extent, Hinge Marketing, providing research that bears out my experiential approach. So I'm right about 90% of the time. I can admit when I'm wrong. Doesn't happen often. When you've been doing this as long as me, your instincts are usually pretty good if you pay attention. But it does get back to the data. Who's winning the contracts? The top 10% of companies in this market are walking away with 70% of the dollars. So if you're mapping what losers are doing, you're in the wrong camp. Follow what the winners are doing and see how they're disseminating information. You take a company like Carahsoft, which is Craig Abod's baby. Since day one, Craig has been pushing webinars, but he's been pushing educational webinars on all of the software that Carahsoft sells. There is no sales aspect to those webinars. So he has become a trusted source of education in that software realm, and witness the growth. No mergers. They're going to push $6 billion this year. That is not chump change.
Can I add something as well? These type of surveys that we're talking about today are invaluable, but I really encourage every marketer as well to do some research on your own. For example, every single agency has a strategic guide, a strategic report that was created by their C-suite that is public information through FOIA, and you can go and get that. So Those are some things you can pull out if you're doing very specific agency-based marketing. I really recommend you go online and start looking for that type of information because it's there and it will tell you everything you need to know about where that agency is going from an IT perspective for the next 5 years.
And then go to the FPDS and find out who the players are there.
Yeah, I'm going to add one other thing because everyone in this room for their companies, for the most part, is considered overhead. And all of you have to justify why your company should increase its spending on the things that you're doing because it's going to take directly from the bottom line. And often you try to marry yourselves with BD because you're saying, oh, this is going to help with BD. And we increase the sales, and you work hard to make sure you have the infrastructure set up to say, hey, this lead was generated at our event, at our booth, or it came in because of this webinar we did, and try to track them through the things. One thing that we'll do is, we often do is from the research perspective, is tracking some of the things over time that you're doing of raising your brand awareness, raising your reputation. But the other main thing we look at is often consideration of you. You want to make sure you're on the short list when the contracts come up. And that's one thing, we got familiarity and favorability are great, but we'll get into that consideration and preference often so that you can hold up and say, you know what, our familiarity hasn't changed a lot over time. We've hit a max. There's only a certain number of people who are going to be aware of us out there. But we want to make sure that we're on the short list, consideration list of every contract that's in our bucket out there. What is it do we have to do to be on that consideration list or be the preferred company for them going forward? That's often a lot is compelling then to take to your BD teams, to take to corporate leadership and say, okay, look, we've moved it where we're being considered on 40% of the relevant contracts now, as opposed to 25%, 2 or 3 years ago. Now all of a sudden you're speaking their language, and they can see and connect that directly to sales.
How do you do that? Do you actually go through with them and track what
we
opportunities their BD
take
people
them
have?
through a funnel. We kind of go the next steps after asking familiarity and brand. We'll lay out that consideration set and say, tell me your short list of, regardless of what the specific widget is or service is that you're buying, who would you immediately put into this bucket to consider for them? Where if they knocked on your door and said, I have this solution for you, you'd say, come on in. And there are companies, everybody knows them, but that's where you really want to make sure that you're on that short list. And if you're not, you really want to know why.
Right.
And Will, you also, in your marketing plan, you need to market to the SIs as much as civilian DoD intel. SIs are critical.
Yeah, it's another channel way to get in there. But you talked about the brands that take a dip or have the commercial bumps in the road that are along the way. We've seen over time that the commercial bumps in the road do make a difference in some of that favorability, but oftentimes we see the consideration that set doesn't quite fluctuate as much as the favorability does. So they may still say, okay, yeah, you've taken a hit over here on the commercial side, whether it's been data leakages or hacks or whatever may happen. But you know what? If you knock on the door and say, I have a solution for you, you're still going to be part of that considered set for the most part because memories are long.
Yeah.
And this market doesn't turn over as fast as you think.
No, but depending on what your goal is. So if your goal is to get on Oasis or Soup, you've got to start mapping out your strategy now because neither of them has an on-ramp in the near term. So I helped companies get on Soup 5, and we started planning 36 months prior to, and that's really almost late. So Joanne doesn't want 10,000 companies on her contract. She's pissed that she has 100. So planting the seeds in your organization that this is a long-term marketing thing, as long as you also have your short-term at the same time. But getting on those larger vehicles is, number one, not a given, and it's not something you can start 4 months prior to the RFP hitting the street.
But once you're on them, that's not the end of the road. I mean, that's
Oh,
not,
yeah, no.
you're still
If-
climbing the mountain.
If you win the coveted spot, you're now in a smaller gene pool to go after those task orders. Different type of marketing. But hopefully the marketing that you've done to get on the radar, all of the marketing you've done to get on and stay on the radar, involves that content development, showing your true worth, and making that short list to get some of those key task orders.
And you know, one
off
way to
those
do that,
vehicles.
we have a class at GMARQ coming out soon called the Orchestra. And it is all about when you go after a contract, could be a small, could be a large, could be a multi-billion-dollar contract, pull together an orchestra. It's every person from every department in your organization. And I always encourage marketers to get involved in that capture. It's all about capturing that opportunity. Because honestly, and some of you I'm sure have seen it as well, some of the proposals going out of your company, you'd be really sad as a marketer. So insert yourself into that capture team, be part of that orchestra, and make sure those proposals, number one, government is going a lot more digital, government is going towards video proposals. So get out in front of that and make sure that proposal is not 532 pages of text.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to go to the audience for questions. So if you have a question, think about it. And I'll just ask one more question. The key challenge that this is kind of a mind-blowing observation to me because we're like kind of in the awareness business, but just the challenges of building awareness in this market. When we ask people, a lot of brands don't move that much. We see some brands move a lot, but not on general. The building of awareness is a challenge. There's a lot of people here who have smaller budgets. And I guess, what are some of the things that you see companies doing that can tackle the awareness problem if you're not Microsoft
Loaded
or
in the
Google
money.
or have a Super Bowl sponsorship?
Go where government is going. I mean, I've preached that for 30 years now. Don't try to do something on your own. You're shaking your head, Tom. Go where government is going. Be a sponsor at a GovExec event.
Yeah,
because
that works really well.
That's
I
where
can promise
government
you.
is.
I'm glad you said that, Luann.
Did you also notice I dressed in the leading brands colors today?
She's
Am I
totally
marketer
on
or
brand
what?
today. It's amazing.
But no, go where government is going. It's real simple, and they're going everywhere. And the lists are out there that you can identify where they're going, and put your money there. Don't try to do something on your own.
Aaron?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say that do your homework on targeting your specific market. One of the easier things, if you got a limited budget, you either, narrow your message or narrow your outreach or narrow your audience. And if you do your homework on your audience, you can be where they are. But the key is that make sure you're not just trying to play your same marketing shtick in the same way to those niche audiences. Know that audience, know what you want to say to them. So it's okay if there's only, I've got a limited budget. I can only be 2 places. I can only talk to 2 audiences this year. That's the money I have. Set that as your goal. Set the benchmark now. Set the future. So you're achieving things. So next year, maybe corporate leadership says, let's go after 3 audiences. And you can expand. But set yourself a goal. Measure it before. Measure it afterwards. So then you can go back to them and say, look, this is what we did. Because doing it on bottom line sales, it takes too long.
Yeah.
You're not going to show, and it's too hard to draw that dotted line from what you were doing here to that sale at the end. Look at that incremental steps along the way.
If you've read my stuff before or you listen to my radio show, you've been waiting for this. The most underutilized marketing tool in our market is LinkedIn. There are 2.2 million feds on LinkedIn. Every major contractor, i.e. companies that own business with the government, is on LinkedIn. And if you're not leveraging it fully, and this doesn't mean paid advertising on LinkedIn. This means using the free stuff that anybody can do on LinkedIn. I've trained over 50 companies in the market on LinkedIn, and invariably the sales guy, the vice president of sales, will come up after the training and say, I had no clue LinkedIn could do this. So take a harder look at it. If you want to talk about it, I'm pleased to talk about it anytime, anywhere, in my sleep, on my show.
No, but it's a good point. I mean, Mark actually called me and Connie this week to point out that he's tracking the marketing of this event, that we weren't actually amplifying it through our own salespeople. Yeah, I was doing a great job of it. But Connie was a little, needed some help, but it's like an obvious point though, right? Like it's like, why didn't we think to really get everybody talking about this event on our own employee staff who know you guys and know your colleagues better than us? So it's easy to say, oh, we have a LinkedIn strategy, but I think carrying it out can be a challenge. So.
Yes, and
Hire Mark.
most companies, it's so embedded in the market at this part. It's so much a part of the ecosystem, you take it for granted. Don't.
Questions? Happy to ask the panel, or questions about the study.
I
can
want
take
questions from these people over here. You know who I'm talking to.
Tom Suter has the first question. He raised his hand. He's the only person to raise his hand. That's the only reason he gets it.
How important is it to develop thought leaders in the company, especially technical federal leaders to the brand? What's that correlation? Is that a big factor or?
It's a great question. I mean, we don't actually measure the. Oh yeah, for the people streaming and online, the question was, how important is it to develop thought leaders and as part of your corporate brand? I think it's a great question. I mean, I don't know if you guys we don't have actual data on like, well, this leader is this, but it seems like it's important.
It is huge. People like thought leaders, but again, you build that thought leader position, you have two problems. Number one, if they say something untoward, you're violating the trust of the audience you serve. Number two, if they are not golden handcuffed to your organization, they can migrate. So you're spending time and money building them up, so lock them in somehow. But is it important? Hell yes. We all like to read or listen to very specific people. Why? Because they know a lot of stuff that we want to know.
I kind of have a different perspective, and I'm a fan of having a thought leader in your company, but I'm more a believer in having a thought leader in government tooting your horn. And there's many ways to do that. There's many former federal CIOs and CTOs and CISOs out there that love to get involved either on boards, writing byline articles. We use them all the time, ghost-written byline article, and you've got a Henry Sienkiewicz from DISA, who was the former CIO. He loves to have his name on there. So it's a very pointed, useful tool. Important to have a thought leader in your company, yeah, but a lot of times that's a VP of sales, kind of fuzzy where it goes. Find a thought leader in government and get them on your team.
Yeah, and I was going to say that there's really two types of thought leaders out there. There's the ones that you have in-house, and then there's the ones that you've cultivated, or are folks that maybe aren't necessarily beholden to your brand, but everybody looks to them as being someone that when they speak, I listen to them. In our recent study we did on content marketing, we did ask about thought leadership, and we differentiated between those that sit in government and those that sit in your company. And we did find that there was a difference. The folks at the state and local level were much more interested and more willing to hear from thought leaders in the kind of government, other folks like themselves, and make sure that they were spread, they could hear from other folks like themselves. Federal folks are also, we're more like in the, hearing some of the industry folks along the way as well. But it really came down to both of them as the medium in which it was delivered to them. The thought leaders, they definitely wanted in kind of short written pieces of information, rather than throwing a video up there of them talking for 20 minutes. Right. They want to read little bits and pieces of them. So thought leaders are important, but you got to think about the best way to deliver their message. And as Mark said, do not keep it so it's not a sales pitch. It is just talking about the topics of the industry itself.
So we had a panel a while back, how not to get the attention of a federal CIO. And Roger Baker, who at the time was at VA, so this was about 3 years ago, told a great story kind of tied to that where, and you're going to love this, Mark, where there was somebody coming in to see him. It was a thought leader of a company, but before, he's like, I go to LinkedIn and look up everything about them. And this guy his picture was he was catching a fish, and he had nothing on his LinkedIn other than he worked for this company that would ever make this CIO think that he was coming in to offer him anything of use. So if you are using a thought leader or a SME in your company, goes back to the LinkedIn, get their LinkedIn page updated, and don't have pictures of catching a fish.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot.
Yeah. No,
you see these photos
I see a lot
on
of blank
LinkedIn, and you're like, boing.
pages. I mean, I meet with the thought leader people always are introducing our editors and stuff, and I'll sit in on them, and there's oftentimes we walk in kind of blind, and versus, well, I did this major transformation, and you sit there and you're like, well, why isn't that in your bio? Why isn't
Yeah.
that in your LinkedIn profile?
Yep.
So
And that's
Anybody
where
here
marketing can
notice that
kick
I
in
was
and help.
looking at their LinkedIn profiles yesterday?
all of you.
The kids in the over.
One more question? Go ahead.
You mentioned that there are about 50% that answer the survey, I assume federal government. Are there ways that to get their awareness and or increase favorability?
That's a great question. So the question is, the women responded to the survey about 50%, but we also see their influence in the purchase decision process increasing over time. And are there ways to address favorability with women? And so I would throw that out to you guys. I have some ideas, but have you seen good tactics that companies have tried to address it with?
I have not actually done marketing by gender, but it's something to think about. And looking at Stephanie, we're going to go away and noodle on that, come back with something on GMarkU, because I think that it's something to think about. What comes to mind first is women are more emotional buyers, pretty obvious. Maybe, and this has worked well, especially when it's at Juniper Networks, is tying to charities and really tying into what's passionate, to them. So that's one thing that comes to mind, but I need to go away and research that more.
Yeah, I would say that, we have a lot of folks that ask us about some very specific demographics in there. And often I will stop them a little short and say, okay, do you really have the budget or time to do a real differentiation between those? Or is it or should your targeting be on the needs of that particular agency and less of them as an individual? If you're marketing to them for their own consumer needs, where they are purchasing, financial products or other things that they use personally, they just happen to work in the federal government, that's one thing. But if it's that business decision at work, I think all of us would like to be able to tailor our marketing message down very detailed, but I often wonder what is the incremental value for incurring that additional cost to do so. Is the upside worth it? I could be wrong, but that's usually where I stop. I know everybody's budgets are about a third of what they wish they could have. So, you build the base and then you tailor from there. So, to Luann, I haven't seen somebody who's done in the government space, done a real specific gender, or, we look at, race and ethnicity as well.
Yeah.
We don't see that as much other than demonstrating some level of diversity.
Yeah.
And connecting in that way and commitment to some of those efforts, whether it be, in those areas. That's about as far as I see it go.
Mark, do you have anything to add here?
A quick anecdote. I've been speaking in the market since the late 80s, and my speaking coach, who wasn't my coach at the time, saw me at the Tower Club and came up after me and said, "You realize, of course, you're turning off 50% of the audience." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You have a very colorful way of expressing yourself." So Maggie Bedrosian adopted me, and we eliminated almost all, not quite all, of the cursing from my public presentations. But what drove home the message was bringing my daughter, who was 3 at the time, home to see my mom. My daughter walks in the house and goes, "Shit, Grandma, shit." That was curative. So.
Well, I think that because this has been a key question in a lot of companies that I get leading brand study, the one thing to remember is that the government space is probably, I'd challenge anyone to tell me a different market that is more diverse, and that the power buyers are more diverse in the government market than I think any other market in the United States and maybe the world. And so if you go to a government executive event, if you go to the real government employee union events or things like that, it is probably the most diverse crowd of professionals that you're going to find in, I think, almost any industry. And so those are the customer base. It's a diverse customer base, and I think that's where the red flags come out. And the companies that are really addressing it are going tactically at their biggest weakness. So it's that you have a problem in your brand. You're number 3 among men, and you're number 25 among women. Something happened. Figure out what it was. It's not by chance that women. It's not because they perceive things differently or perceive your marketing differently. You probably did something to cause that. So stop doing that thing and then start fixing it. Right? It's kind of obvious, but we've dealt with this a lot. So.
Well, and also looking at the positions and the roles that the individuals play within the agencies themselves. Whether you're going to a technology crowd, whether you're going to a crowd that deals, in different healthcare crowd, whatever it may be, that job role, we have found is often much more, is a great tell about their role, whether they're in a program manager role where they're seeing a little bit of a bigger picture, whether they're detailed tech, or whether they're doing, HR back office solutions. Often those things are are the ways that we recommend walking in and talking to folks.
That's great. So we are out of time, so I just wanted to thank our power players for joining us. Luann, Aaron, and Mark, thanks for...
Can I pitch Gain? Talk about Gain? Talk
I'd
about
like
Gain
to
and
thank
discount.
you guys for coming. So thank you for spending your morning with us.
And Luann has Gain. Let's talk about Gain a little
Yeah,
bit. Coming
so
up in-
for those of you not familiar with Government Marketing University, we have an annual conference. It's the 4th annual GAIN 2019 coming up on Tuesday, November 12th. You can go to thegainconference.com. GAIN stands for Grow, Accelerate, Innovate, and Network. And Will and Connie have been strong partners of both GMarkU and GAIN for a long time. And in talking with Will last week, we currently have early bird pricing going until July 30th. But because of GovExec, they're offering an additional 10% off of GAIN registration through this coming Monday, July 17th, COB. So thank you. And everybody go to thegainconference.com. To register, all you need to use on the registration site is Leading Brands, all in caps, and you'll get an additional 10% off the early bird pricing.
If you like networking with your
See you,
marketing
Gain.
peers, there is no other venue.
Yeah, I think it's a great venue.
We're expecting close to 400 this year.
Wow.
Mention the survey.
Survey.
Oh, right now, some of you may have received it. We've sent out a survey, joint working with Government Marketing University, of marketers of yourselves, asking about the issues that face you as an individual at work, the challenges you have with your own compensation, with the budgets that you have, things like that. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, you'll see it soon. It'll be coming out. Please take a moment. It just takes a couple minutes. Fill it out. It's all anonymous. But we wanted to get a feel for you all so that you have some information that you can advocate for yourselves with inside your organizations. Often you are a marketing shop of one or two, public sector embedded within a commercial world in many cases, and you have to justify your own efforts. This is one of those tools that Luann came up and her team came up with in order to help you all doing it. So you'll see that come.
Because we're trying to get you more money. Because a government marketer is a corporate marketer, right? A traditional field marketer is primarily doing events. A public sector marketer does events. You do content, you do social media, you do events, you do it all, and you deserve more money. So that's what we're hoping to be able to show from that.
Great.
Hopefully.
Keep jumping.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys all for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to some of the findings of the key companies. So we're going to do fast movers, right?
Yes,
and
fast
who moved
movers.
the dial this year?
So it's very exciting stuff. Okay. So Tim is going to come back shortly and just do the big reveal, which is the moment you've all been waiting for, which are the leading brands for 2019. But first, we wanted to take some time to highlight the brands who earned fast mover status for 2019. So what is a fast mover? Fast movers are the brands that saw the biggest percentage point increase for familiarity and favorability. In layman's terms, that means that the brands that saw the biggest gains in both awareness and perception over the last year. So we'll start with awareness. And so I'll get out of the way so if anyone wants to take pictures here. So these are the fast movers in familiarity. Adobe, AT&T, Cisco, Microsoft, Salesforce, and Splunk. I will say that this list changes every year. This is actually, again, a place where you can see some real efforts here. And so these are the brands definitely that are leading increases in familiarity year over year. Anything, Igor, you'd want to add to that? Or? Okay, great. Yep.
I would say about it is
Yeah.
that, just give away. And familiarity, the fast movers often have Silicon Valley entrants in them. So when you see Salesforce in particular, Splunk, I mean, those are companies that are coming in from a very low awareness actually historically. So you see the familiarity rising. I think it's also interesting that like companies like Adobe, AT&T, and Cisco, which are established brands, are growing pretty fast
Right.
as well.
Absolutely.
Microsoft.
And like again, I think this list was very different last year.
Yeah.
So this is a place that I think we like to highlight places where you really can make gains, and this is one of those places. And so then next we're going to highlight the 8 brands for favorability. So here they are. And just a little bit of a note on these companies. So these are the the brands that decision makers favored them more in favorability year over year. Again, a very different list. I will say there are some things. ICF has been on this list, I think, a few years. Another point to note here, Guidehouse, they did have a name change. And so that is definitely something that there is a correlation that we see between lower familiarity and greater favorability. So if you have less familiarity, you are going to get to people who are more passionate about your brand and know your brand better. So you're going to see that. So in some cases, whenever the people who are your fans, I think that's kind of what we see there. So there is a real correlation sometimes between greater favorability and lower familiarity, because you're getting into your true fans there and people who know your brand well and who are responding to that. Another thing, too, between 2018 and 2019, the fast movers in favorability saw their biggest attribute gains in, and I think Igor alluded to this earlier, 3 categories: trustworthiness, customized solutions, and innovation. So again, those are places that, those are things that, and words that are really moving, and attributes that are really moving the dial. So those are places, again, where you can actually make some gains. So you take it into context with the broader attribute prioritization list, improving on those 3 areas. We always like to tell you kind of what the 3 big areas are this year, and I would say that would be trustworthiness, customized solutions, and innovation. And so I think that the other thing too, another thing to note on this list, I think we had also indicated Palantir had a really good year with favorability. They did a lot of work. They had a big slump from 2017 to 2018, and then came back from 2018 to 2019. Interesting here, we included L3Harris because the merger announcement had been made, and so this kind of goes against what we had said about like rebranding, except they didn't change their names. So if you look at the difference between Guidehouse and L3Harris, I mean, L3Harris kept both the names and just put them together. That's actually something that does kind of keep your familiarity kind of stable if you're able to do that. And so that was a few like learnings from this list. So, and then with that, I'll just turn it back over to you, Tim, to do the big reveal.
Couple dynamics in play this year for the new leading brands list. We have a couple new companies in here, which I'll point out. There's a lot of stability in the leading brands from the last 3 years, which is kind of interesting to Mark's point, Mark Amtower's point, that people have long memories, and we'll go through some of that as well. I want to talk about how you qualify as a leading brand. So our methodology has been consistent over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of what we classify as a leading brand. It's basically that you pass a 3-part test. First is that you're above average in familiarity among everybody. The second is that you're above average in favorability as well. And then the third is that you're above average in each and every one of the top 8 attributes. And so that's the list that we end up with here. We end up with about 25 names, and I'll walk through them now. Adobe, which is perennially one of the top brands, super powerful in all segments of government in terms of brand equity. CDWG, Cisco, Citrix, and Citrix is new this year. Dell EMC, Esri. Esri is a new leading brand this year, also ranked as the most favored brand of all brands this year, about tied with Adobe in that metric. GE, General Dynamics, Google, Graduate School USA, also a perennial brand that's been a leading brand for many years. Honeywell, IBM, small startup tech company you may have heard of. Intel, L3Harris, We did test it as L3 Harris, which is what they've announced their name is, largely keeping the brand equity of both brands intact. Lockheed Martin, new this year is Management Concepts. Microsoft, Motorola, also new this year. Northrop Grumman, Pratt & Whitney, Raytheon, which has been in the news this week as well, and will keep the name Raytheon apparently in their merger with UTC. SAIC, new entrant. I think there's a huge lesson in SAIC. The brand was left to the side when Leidos was created. If you want any evidence that brands matter in terms of actual valuation of your company, they have resuscitated that brand. They're using it and they're harnessing all of the legacy SAIC brand equity that was there from 5 to 100 years ago, or however old SAIC is. But new this year, rising on all metrics. Many metrics, I won't say all metrics. SAS, also new this year. Siemens. And finally, Symantec, also new this year. Please join me in congratulating the leading brands. So if you want your company's data, if you want your competitive set, please feel free to reach out to your government executive rep. We'll leave this up here so you can take pictures, and you have the room for a while. It's our room, so we can hang out for a while. And I think the next thing is just wrapping? Okay.
We'll have a press release going out about this.
We do announce it publicly.
If you are a leading brand or a rising brand, definitely talk to us. We can help you push that out. I mean, it's a great, tout that. You want to do that.
And we will be sending these slides out to you for your use as well. So
Great.
Thank you again for joining us, and look forward to chatting with you guys after this.